The blazing sun hung low over a silent stretch of desert highway. A shiny red Mustang stood still, its hood open, steam rising like smoke from a battlefield. Beside it, a man in an expensive gray suit wiped sweat from his face, cursing under his breath. He was a millionaire, used to power, used to being served, not stranded. Then, from the distance, a small figure appeared, a 10-year-old white girl, her orange mechanic jumpsuit stained with grease, walking calmly toward him with a wrench in her tiny hand. He frowned, thinking it was some kind of joke. What could a little girl possibly do here? But before he could speak, she knelt beside the engine, eyes scanning it like she'd done this 100 times. Her small hands moved with confidence, twisting bolts, checking pipes. The man stared, speechless. Dust swirled in the golden air, and for a moment, silence filled the road. He was about to ask who she was, until his gaze caught something unexpected. On her finger, a golden ring glinted in the sun, a ring that made his heart stop. If this moment touched your heart, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, because every story here reminds us that humanity still exists. The millionaire's name was Daniel Ward, a man known for building empires and breaking people along the way. His car had broken down on his way to a remote property deal, miles from the nearest town. He didn't like asking for help, especially not from strangers. The girl's sudden appearance made him uneasy. Her clothes were worn, her boots caked in dust, and her calm expression carried a maturity beyond her age. She wasn't scared of him, not even for a second. That bothered him more than the heat. She worked quietly, focused, ignoring his attempts to offer money. "You don't even know what you're doing," he muttered under his breath, but she did. In a few minutes, the engine sputtered back to life. The powerful sound filled the silence, echoing across the desert. Daniel blinked, half in disbelief. The girl stepped back, wiping her hands with a piece of cloth. Her ring caught the sunlight again, engraved, old, elegant. It wasn't the kind of jewelry someone like her should have worn. It looked familiar. He suddenly remembered something, a story from years ago. A family he had once evicted from their home to expand one of his luxury resorts. A mechanic father, a mother who begged him for more time, their daughter, about the same age this girl would be now. They were white, poor, and desperate. He never cared where they went after that, but that ring, the same engraved design his company gave to senior engineers, couldn't belong to just anyone. A chill ran through him as he realized how the past had a way of returning. Daniel followed her to a small roadside garage hidden behind an old gas station. Rusted cars lined the sides and a faded sign read, "Henderson Auto Works." The girl walked ahead confidently, calling out for her dad, but no one answered. The place was quiet, too quiet. Inside, the air smelled of oil and metal. Photos covered the wall. A smiling family, a proud father, a little girl holding a wrench. He looked closer and froze. The man in the photo was the same mechanic he'd once destroyed with a business deal. Guilt clawed at him, but pride kept him silent. The girl noticed his expression but said nothing. Instead, she offered him a glass of water. He took it, his hands trembling slightly. Her kindness felt undeserved. When he asked about her parents, her voice softened. Her father had passed away 3 years ago in an accident while working on a construction site. Her mother, she said quietly, cleaned houses nearby. Daniel's chest tightened. He'd funded that same project. The irony sliced through his thoughts like a blade. He wanted to apologize, but the words wouldn't form. Instead, he offered money again, a thick stack from his wallet. The girl shook her head. Dad said, "Fixing things isn't about money. It's about doing what's..." That sentence struck him harder than he expected. His world had been built on profit, power, and manipulation. This child, standing in grease and dust, had more integrity than anyone in his boardroom. He suddenly felt small, not because of her age, but because of what she represented. As dusk approached, Daniel prepared to leave, but something made him stop. He turned to ask her one last question about the ring. She smiled softly. "It was my dad's. He said he earned it before everything changed." Daniel's throat went dry. That ring wasn't just any piece of jewelry. It was a reward given by him to the man he'd fired unjustly. He realized in horror that this little girl had fixed the car of the man who had destroyed her family, and she'd done it without hate. The desert wind picked up, carrying grains of sand that stung Daniel's face. He stood frozen, staring at the girl, the daughter of the man whose life he'd ruined. His heart pounded as guilt burned through every vein. Memories of the eviction, the begging eyes of her father, the cold signature he'd written on the contract, all came rushing back. He had turned a family into nothing, yet here she was, helping him without knowing who he was. Or maybe she did know. The desert wind picked up, carrying grains of sand that stung Daniel's face. He stood frozen, staring at the girl, the daughter of the man whose life he'd ruined. His heart pounded as guilt burned through every vein. Memories of the eviction, the begging eyes of her father, the cold signature he'd written on the contract, all came rushing back. He had turned a family into nothing, yet here she was, helping him without knowing who he was. Or maybe she did know. Her calmness wasn't innocence, it was forgiveness. She had seen his name on his car papers, maybe even recognized him the moment she approached, but instead of anger, she chose kindness. That realization crushed him. He felt his knees weaken, his expensive shoes sinking into the dirt. For years he had believed money could buy redemption, but this child had given him something no wealth could purchase: mercy. The same mercy he had denied others his entire life. Tears he'd never allowed himself began to fall. Before leaving, Daniel took off his gold wristwatch, a rare piece worth thousands, and placed it on the workbench. "For your future," he whispered. The girl didn't take it. She smiled, shaking her head gently. "Dad said real value isn't what you wear, it's what you fix." He felt the words burn into his heart. For the first time, he didn't feel like a millionaire. He felt like a man stripped of everything but his conscience. He drove away, his eyes wet, the sunset fading behind him. Months later, Daniel returned. The garage had been repainted, business booming. A small sign hung above the entrance: Henderson Auto Works, built on honesty. He smiled through tears, realizing she had used his silent donation to rebuild, but under her own name, her own strength. He didn't enter, just watched from the distance. That day he understood what true wealth meant, not luxury, but redemption. As he drove off once more, the ring flashed in his memory, a circle of gold, endless and complete, just like forgiveness. The narrator's voice fades as the screen darkens. Sometimes the smallest hands fix the biggest hearts.